Good. Yeah. So where was I? I had a few squires there. I just started the recording, so that's super out of context. Then I had a Burns of London guitar, which I think was actually made in Vietnam, but very cool pickups, kind of stratty. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Anyway, they paid me a decent bonus at the company, so we just went proper Stratocaster this week. So
Oh, very nice.
weird color, but I got it used. So
I've got a slightly embarrassing story about guitars. Not in like a publicly embarrassing way, but just that I had tried practicing guitar. Like I've been like basically classically trained pianist from like age 5 or something. My parents were big into like, oh wow, he has interest in the piano, so let's give him piano lessons for a decade plus, which I'm thankful for. And then through that like musical journey, I was also at some points was like, man, this piano is not really as cool as those guys with those electric guitars and those drums and like the cool things, like you very rarely saw a piano guy rocking out on MTV. Like once in a while, there might be like a slow jam with like a Guns N' Roses or something. But anyways, I got really into like wanting to play guitar, and I tried my damnedest, and I had lessons and everything. And I think I worked at it for like, at least a year and a half, 2 years to get the calluses that you need to slide your fingers around, and like the pain of playing without a pick went away, so I at least played long enough to get to where you need to be to start getting really good. But then I had like one of my friend's older brothers came over, and he's like, oh cool, you got a guitar? And he picks it up and he just started like shredding on it, like absolutely shredding, playing like solos and all this. And I was mind blown because like, I had been practicing music for over a decade at this point already anyways, and just trying to learn guitar, and I was nowhere near his level. And he's like, oh yeah, I just I picked it up maybe 4 months ago, 5 months ago, and just kind of teaching myself. And it blew my mind. And I swear to you, and again, this is the embarrassing aspect of it, but I don't think I ever picked that guitar up again without just feeling like I was like like I was just so far away from the natural talent that this guy had by just holding it in his hands, that I felt like even with practice, like I could only get almost as good as he already was just naturally. I didn't feel that way about piano or keyboards, but with guitar for whatever reason. And that, I don't know, I always think of that when I see someone like practicing guitar. I'm always a little bit jealous when someone's like really good at it, because I wanted so bad to be good at it, but I just wasn't.
I can the best I can do on a piano is like boogie woogie chords anyway. So, but no, I get it. I didn't play slide guitar for like 5 years because I had a roommate who just was like an amazing slide player, and I just like I'll
What's the
play it
point,
now.
right? But I mean, thinking back, I kind of wish I would have just like tried to practice with him and figure out what because obviously it's not like you're definitely born with some inherent skill that other people can never attain to, although the little minutia, of course there's like the small percent, but it was like disheartening. Like, it wasn't like a motivator to be like, oh man, he's so good, I should get good too. It was like, oh man, why even try?
I wasted so much. Yeah, that's why I have a slide. Well, I keep instruments at the office because I'm nuts, but I think I might have pulled that on one of my coworkers because he's like, yeah, I just want to get good enough where I can like sit down and like kind of just jam out the blues. I was like, what, like this? He's like, I might have given him the same moment.
Cool enough is that the blues is probably, I mean, this is opinionated, but might be one of the easiest things to play because you learn like the few chord progressions that you just personally really like, and it's just all about the cadence between those notes and just playing around with them.
Yeah, I'll actually agree with that because if I wasn't holding a microphone, I could probably like sit here talking to you while doing that. So
yeah. And it's fun, like you can just walk up and down a single chord for like 20 minutes and you can turn that into blues. And I mean, and that's actually an advantage of it. That's not like a dig at blues. If anything, that's elevating it.
If you do it well, they'll call you God, won't they?
Yeah. Slap the side every once in a while for good measure. Yeah.
Yeah, really. I'm gonna go ahead and bring my notes up on the other side of the screen. Yeah, what I sent is I have a friend who actually is on this podcast sometimes, but I was like, he'd probably like to be on the call, but he's teaching a class at this moment. So I was finishing up the Wild Minds books. I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. and I'll sick him on a little bit more on the magic and see what he comes up with. So that's why there's two sets of notes.
Okay.
The super abstract ones are him.
Yeah, I saw the magic notes and I was like, I hope you're not expecting me to get too much in the magic.
No, I actually yesterday when I it was funny because another coworker had listened to one of the videos I had done with this guy where he does spoken words, and he's like, what was he talking about? What did it mean? I'm like, I don't know.
Spoken word like slam poetry or
Sort of, kind of,
like beatnik-esque poetry.
I'm gonna go more with beatnik on that case, but yeah. I think he was thinking it was gonna be like kind of like a meditational video, like you listen to Alan Watts with some chill beats or something. But
I was literally doing that yesterday. Some soundtrack I had on Spotify, I kept throwing like remixed Alan Watts speeches at me with like low tempo jazz.
right, so that's what he was expecting, which he said he liked it, and he liked the poetry. He was like, I don't know if I trust meditating with this guy. So that was kind of fun. I was like, yeah, these were actually meant as like, kind of songs, not so much as, oops, sorry, not they weren't supposed to be something you meditate with, right? I mean, you can, but it's not an instruction or anything like that. So
I mean, you're supposed to meditate and complete. I guess there's really no rules to meditation, right? But I feel like it's more conducive to just have no external stimuli at all.
that's what I do. But I mean, a lot of people like guided ones or YouTube videos. Actually,
Fair enough.
I guess I started
Guided will put me to sleep 10 times out of 10.
Same here. I actually yeah, I guess this has been since last time we recorded. The same guy that I was blues jamming, that wants to blues jam, is he started doing what he was like, I'm going to start one of those YouTube videos with that. Do you have any music? So I gave him a few pieces of electronic stuff, and he like took, it was 4-minute track, and he like loop it for an hour, and I was like, that's stupid. I can actually like, make you tracks for this. So I've actually been making binaural beats on the train.
Oh, we should talk outside of this on that, because I've got a project that needs some period piece music that you might be able to help with.
Yeah, hit me up with that. But yeah, in fact, this is just me on my iPad on the train, because I have a synth, a virtual one where you can adjust it to 432. So you do the binaural beat ones at 432, and the other one you just like, I just choose a number and detune it to that number. And so I'm it's a little bit of guesswork. And then I found this another virtual synth called the Vhs Synth, which basically makes everything sound like it's coming through a crappy VHS tape. So, and you can choose the amount that it sounds like that. So that's been my primary.
Yeah, I've got a number though. I've one of my favorites, I think it's called RC20, and I can't remember the company that makes it, but it's got all sorts of those. It's basically like a magnetic tape head simulation that also emulates like grit and maybe like the belt drive gaining and losing momentum to kind of add like a warble effect and stuff.
That's actually I don't know if you can see it or not. Yeah, that's my current crop of, it's a little fuzzy. Oh, there we go. My current crop of virtual synths. And but yeah, these I get a lot of times I'll use the synths and then later go and put like actual analogs on them. But in the case of these, they're probably fine as is. So okay, I guess we should jump into this. I have like a little more time than usual, though I don't know if we'll need it. But yeah, because when we're doing your Wednesday night, I was like, I gotta run for the train, whereas this is the day I actually don't need to run for a train. So
okay, right on.
Not a day off, but just a later start time. Okay, I'm gonna just shut up for 5 seconds because that's where I can like easily see where to edit.
Okay.
Hello, welcome to Oral Hygiene. We are getting into our Occult Disney series. We might really just be talking about the film somewhat today, but it's a fun one to talk about. It's Dumbo. This is Matt here. We have Thomas Gorence, the Paranoid American, on the other end. Hello again.
Hello.
Working on through these movies a little more. This is the first one that I guess is kind of out of like the purview of what your original research was into, because we did Pinocchio, we did Fantasia, we did Snow White, which you had like half of you had enough notes to like write a book on those. So
yeah, and those ones admittedly I was watching specifically through kind of like occultist lens, and I didn't, for both of those movies too, for Snow White and Pinocchio, I don't know if I had as much of a personal connection to those, so it was very easy for me to like step outside and watch it from a whole bunch of different angles and like really read into it and try to find like every little symbol that I might have been able to find. That's not really me normally as a like a person. I feel like I would never get anything done if I was just constantly looking for triangles and like occult symbols everywhere. So I took a little bit of a step back from that in Dumbo when I was watching it and taking some notes, but also this might be the hardest movie out of any movie that you could name in the in the universe. It would be the hardest one for me to step outside and remove my nostalgia from it, because this might have been the one that was on repeat the most from ages, I don't know, 2 through 10 or something. Like I absolutely have not seen this in over 2 decades, but I felt like some of the scenes like I could almost recite them by memory as they came up.
I think for me, maybe I just saw Dumbo once as an actual child, like maybe like a, take the kindergarten kids to the matinee theater, get them out of the parents' hair for a while, sort of thing. I think I saw Dumbo that way. And then
For me, this would have been just like the one bootleg VHS that my parents happened to have recorded, so it was just stuck in the VCR for years.
right, so cue up, 25, 30 years later, where I have a daughter, and it's right at the time Disney's putting out all their classic films on Blu-ray. So I got Dumbo, and partly she wanted to watch it, and partly I was like, oh, I'm gonna put on Dumbo again, because yeah, as a 30 something year old dude, I was like into Dumbo. So I teach a lot of
I,
kids
I
now.
want to point out though, as a 30-plus-year-old guy, I think out of all the Disney movies that you might have on repeat, Dumbo might be the least creepy of anything that you could pick.
Okay, that's good. It was that in the somewhat recent Winnie the Pooh movie that tended to be on the highest rotation for Disney. Oh, and those crappy straight to video Tinkerbells, because there was a toddler in the room. But no, I quite enjoyed watching it. Then of course, the Pink Elephants, I've already like made like albums of psychedelic rock by this point. So watching the Pink Elephants, you're like, what? That's great. So but yeah, my recent views probably yeah, it's been a few years since I had seen it, so it's kind of fun to revisit. I teach a
Yeah,
bunch
and
of
I don't
kids,
I don't
so
have kids, so I rarely have a reason to rewatch like old Disney classics unless I'm just specifically in some kind of weird nostalgic mood.
yeah, recently I have not been doing that so much, of course, but no, and
I'm
kids ask
curious
me like, what's your
how
favorite Disney movie? What's your favorite character? It depends on the day, but it's either going to be Dumbo in the movie Dumbo or Stitch and
awesome.
Lilo and Stitch. With the rider, I love to add to the kids, it's because they don't talk.
Oh wow, I actually didn't even make that mental note that Dumbo never actually says anything throughout this movie.
Right. As much as I love Pinocchio, he does have that voice that is a little bit grating. uh, sorry, you had your point to make.
No, I was basically just chiming on to exactly what you were saying.
Okay. Just in case someone's just kind of stumbling into this without having recently done it, I could you give us that TV guide ramble just on what happens here?
For you mean for the entire movie?
Yeah, in a TV guide sort of way, yes.
Yeah. So it's essentially about a elephant that has huge ears, which originally is sort of like an embarrassing thing that the elephant hides and becomes this funny thing that he stumbles over and is like a blocker for advancing through life and just causes nothing but problems. And then towards the end, learns that the ears allow the elephant to fly. So it kind of like reveals. I kept going with like a reindeer or like a Rudolph analogy of like, haha, Rudolph's red nose, and it's like this big way to like outcast the one person that stands out, and then they come through and save the day. Very much an analogy here to Dumbo, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, like you said, maybe this one has less like overt like let's dig into the magical symbolism, but that kind of is an encapsulation of like what not practitioners of magic would be doing, right? Turning the profane into something rarefied, which is kind of what this movie does.
Yeah,
In
I mean, and you could also, from a more generalist standpoint, it's sort of like the quintessential hero's journey of being born with this burden, and then going through this, self realization followed by transformation followed by atonement. It's almost like step for step Joseph Campbell, but 1940s cartoon.
Yeah, and I think you could said you had read the Wild Minds book about animation. If not, it sounds like you have. But um, I I had always had the impression that this was like what Disney's B team was up to while the A team was doing something else, which is, and I think I said that on a previous podcast, which I will need to correct myself, with Dumbo apparently being the result of the animation strikes of the early 40s, where the Fleischer Studios was basically like castrated and then like taken over by Paramount around this time due to union
and
stuff.
and no small part to Disney as well for siphoning away a lot of Fleischer's talents. So it
Exactly.
was, so they had already been bleeding out for years and lost a huge, I mean, when Disney released their first two movies and Fleischer's, biggest thing to the market was like a 10-minute animation that would have been like a preview to a motion picture. They were sort of on the way down, and then Paramount was just like a way to like kick them while they were down and absorb them.
They did have the late resurgence with the very cool Superman cartoon, of course, but yeah. But Disney was also like hurt. I mean, maybe it seemed like he didn't understand what workers' rights were, more or less. What's his quote? Like, I started off as a Democrat and eventually became a Republican, but
Yes, I mean, so I've read a very controversial book. It's called, I think it's like the Dark Side of Disney. It's like the unofficial biography of Walt Disney, and it gets into some very interesting territories. But one of them is very much his candid dislike of unions, and I don't really think he had any issue working someone to the absolute bone. If anything, he saw that as like the most purest form of dedication to the art. And I think part of that was just from being like, almost like a slave driver in his own mind. But I think he had extremely high standards for himself, despite not maybe not putting in the same like work sitting down at a desk with a pencil day and night. But I feel like he was also a person that probably rarely slept or rarely spent a moment that wasn't developing or mechanizing something.
yeah, Dumbo came out in November of 1941, and I think it was February of 1941. Like Fantasia come out, like, not a complete, financially not a complete disaster, but didn't set fire like the past few movies had. So, and with the union stuff, he gives a speech to the company apparently, which he's like, okay, I'm gonna give myself a 75% pay cut, and all of you are gonna get pay cuts too. And like in his mind, I'm sure he was like, oh, this is logical. But what he did was like, basically send a third of his staff to the picket line.
I have to say, man, from being inside the ranks of Disney for 10 years, admittedly, half of that was as like a contractor after our company sort of like parted ways. But anyways, being inside of like the actual, mechanisms of the Disney Corporation, I feel like his DNA like has outlasted him. Like that same mentality and the same kind of like, anti-union work nature, and more importantly, you should accept being paid so much less and working so much harder just to have the name, Disney on your resume. Like that's a very real dynamic that exists, to the same way as like Blizzard might in the video game development industry, where it's like, yeah, we're not going to, give you the greatest benefits, but you get to work for us.
And only 3 years earlier, they got to have the Snow White rap party, which just I guess this maybe matches your Pinocchio release story, where where they, once Snow White was quite profitable, Disney gave folks a big bonus. He gave the bonuses a whim, apparently, so there weren't like a nice concrete rubric. So when he was feeling generous, you get some money, but otherwise you would not. But he took the whole staff to somewhere up in the mountains, in California, to have a party, where the animators and the ink and paint girls very quickly got very drunk and started sneaking off into the bushes and making loud noises. Disney left the party early, and the word on the street, or at least in the animation studios, was if you want to keep your job, never mention the party to him again. So,
I don't know if I've read that in like one of those books or if I heard someone telling me that story, but I've absolutely heard that before.
yeah.
I have, and I've heard another one too. That's probably less entertaining, but it's still one that I'll never forget it because it was funny at the time. But that there was apparently some guy that had worked in the archives, and everyone knew that he would go down there and like sleep and take naps or whatever. And this was like towards like the very end of Disney's life, I think. So I don't think he interacted directly, but it like he was aware of this guy that was like always taking naps. So there was almost an initiative to like find this guy asleep and catch him red-handed so that we can just fire him and be done with this, this guy. And it wasn't because he was bad at his job. It was just because it was like really annoying that this guy was taking naps on the job. So the one time or like 2 or 3 times they thought they would catch him. And every time the guy was able to wake up and put his hands immediately into a prayer and like kind of do like a hail, like a Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and was, amen. And he would always claim that he was in prayer and that he wasn't sleeping. And I guess like that was always this little thing that he was able to like sneak out of it somehow. I always thought that was kind of a clever anecdote.
I had that happen, and unfortunately, I'm observing other people's lessons at my job, and I'm usually a teacher. I'm standing, I'm walking around. Here I'm in a chair in the back of the room, and every time, 15 minutes in, I'm like, oh, I hope nobody saw that. I think that little micro nap. There was one student staring right at me. I think they caught me. So
whatever, man.
Yeah.
As long as you're not driving, right?
Right, exactly. No, I looked at the clock. I was like, okay, time didn't change, so that I didn't lose too much there. But basically, after getting back to this movie, after February, a third of the staff went on strike, and with we weren't in the war yet, but it was starting to be clear that we needed to choose sides. So Disney and a few of his more loyal, and for better or for worse, animators took a tour of South America, and basically whoever was left in Burbank made Dumbo. I mean, obviously Disney.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't know any of that.
I mean, obviously he was calling in, sending telegrams, all of that, but they basically this is how the mice played when the cat was away. That's supposed to rhyme when you say it correctly, but oh well. The mice will play when the cat's away. There we go. Got it. Okay. So this is literally the mice playing. If you can take Timothy Mouse as a literal representation of that or not, if you want.
Well, and I really do have to say that the animation, whether it was the A team, the B team, or the F team, this is some of my favorite animation. Like I don't care how it was critiqued or rated at the time, or even if it was done in a rush. Some of the scenes here are still the one in particular, which we'll get to later on as we go through kind of like scene by scene. But the scene right before the pink elephants pop up, but after he gets drunk and Dumbo starts blowing the bubbles, and he blows like a stair-shaped case bubble, and then his sidekick tells him, blow a square-shaped bubble, and his trunk turns into like a geometric square, and it pumps out like a squared bubble itself. And then it's like that whole sequence that then leads into the psychedelic elephants. To me, it's cooler than anything that happens in Snow White. By a large margin.
I'll go with that. I mean, like Snow White looks very storybook, very pristine. It looks painted, right? This one looks like a storybook, more like Richard Scarry or the Berenstain Bears or something like that. Kind of the hey, I've seen enough now that it seems almost right, but not quite. But yeah, it's more of a, I guess, cheaper storybook animation, but it works. Like I at the beginning, I was like, okay, they throw the credits are on this like circus poster motif, so they've already got us like set for this kind of animation, which is actually mostly cost saving, right? They just couldn't take the steps they've done with Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Snow White on this one. The war had started. America wasn't in it yet, but it was definitely like time to.
Belts were tightening, and gold was being taken back.
And the military was already kind of asking for favors. That was part of the South American trip. Apparently, the American government did tell him to keep your eye open and be a bit of an informant while you're down there, because there was a lot of Germans hanging around and trying to cozy up to the locals, which maybe Argentina's where that worked out best. I don't know, but
and this forks a little bit into something. I don't know if I brought this up in our first call, but it was in that the Dark Side of Disney book. I think that's the name of it. But they mentioned that he was sort of what they would call a special agent in charge for the FBI, appointed by Hoover himself. and this was because of some, long story short, daddy issues that Disney had with his dad. But they essentially said like, hey, you're in Hollywood, and we're concerned with, communism and fascists and just anyone that's being un-American within Hollywood. So, let us know. Let us know if you go to some Hollywood party and you hear someone talking about, oh, I want to subvert the US and help secede the nation. You come back and let the FBI know. And in exchange, they kind of gave him some promises that they'd help him find his real dad. And I can only assume, this is 100% assumption, no backup, but I assume if they were leading him with that carrot of like, hey, we found your actual dad, which was probably a lie, they might have also been giving him actual kickbacks in the form of like, hey, we'll, fund this movie that you can make for the department, or hey, let me connect you with these guys that we've got from project Operation Paperclip, and maybe they can do something with you. But we can leave that for after Dumbo comes out.
Yeah, that's kind of I feel like that's mostly 50s TV Disney. Von Braun and Disney slapping each other on the back.
Yeah, 100%.
Again, amazing films, but yeah, you can paperclip that all you want. I did read that whole book. What do you know? It's the Area 51 that I didn't read from Annie Jacobson. Okay.
and I wanted to mention too, because getting right into the movie, but I noticed a couple of things about the title screen that struck me immediately. One is more of a personal observation, but it's just that the clowns, as soon as the clowns started coming up, I must have seen that intro graphic hundreds of times. And for whatever reason, I loved clowns as a kid. I know a lot of kids are like afraid of clowns. I loved them. And I think this probably had a big part to play with that. But in retrospect, watching it now, without even like looking into like making the clowns creepy, they're really, really creepy. Like almost every single clown in this movie has like a very high creep factor to them. And I almost feel like it was intent. Like they give them like these expressionless faces that lack, like muscle movements. And you can see when they go back into the tents, all of the humans like take their masks off and stuff. But for most of the people in here, especially the clowns and the railroad workers, which we'll get into, they don't really actually have any faces that you ever see. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then go ahead.
I would say it's almost like you're leading me into this, that the clowns were modeled after the animators that were on strike.
Is this true?
Yeah, this is true. They
had no idea.
See, now I
have to rewatch it because there was a scene when the clowns are all undressing and they're kind of like, yeah, we'll show them that the clowns are really running the show. And now I feel like, those were some direct cuts at the animators that left. But
100%.
And speaking of the animators, another thing that I noticed completely out of context of what you brought up was that in the credits, the longest title screen and the one that they reuse for two different sets of names and has the most names is for the animators. And the title screen, it's actually a strong man holding up two barbells, but the barbells is the title that says animation. So this almost felt like such a direct of like the animators are the one, holding all the weight for this movie. They're the ones doing all the work.
Yeah, Disney was in South America. So I mean, like it usually someone's going to be like, oh, they kick up dust in the Lion King, it says sex, right? But this is way more interesting. They just ribbed on like all their former coworkers, some which did come groveling back actually, but I think it was I want to say John, I can't remember his first name, but last name is Babbitt, very important animator for Disney from the early 30s. They never got along. So that's the sort of gun that was missing from Dumbo, basically, because he was basically leading the strikers.
It's hard, man. You get a lot of very creative people in one room. There's a 0% chance that everyone's getting along with each other.
Yeah, maybe that's why I make music by myself in my own room, or on the train by myself. Yeah. Of course, it is good to have some creative friction as well. So it is important to have collaborators, just if nothing else, as a sounding board, and to check if what you're doing is stupid or not.
Oh yeah, 100% agreed. But again, high pressure environment, 1940s, working under the Disney, like standing over you, making sure that you're working until midnight. You probably got on each other's nerves a lot quicker.
Yeah. Although with the move to the Burbank studio, that's also where Disney was. I mean, that like you said, he was a little hands off in later years, and that was partly physical because in the
Well, yeah, he was tied up with Orlando at that point.
by 60s, no, but even in the late 30s, they made a move, and before he basically had an office just off to the side, right? People could just kind of stick their head in. Whereas once they moved to the larger studio, you'd have to go to a different building, down a corridor, past a few guards, go through a secretary, all that to get to him. So he
The, the
was,
the the Great Wizard of Oz.
yes, he was far more inaccessible by that point, which, I think he did. Maybe part of the actual charm of him is being able to be in the same room. So once he is a suit, he kind of sours a bit. Which I get that. I mean, if my job was like kind of an isolated office, I'm sure I'd come across as like super cold, So
Well, especially when the first thing you start out is like, I want to make these really cool cartoons, and you bring them on the road and you're doing live sound effects and you're looking in the audience's eyes as they're laughing and cheering, and you're sitting there, clopping away and making like four fake horse noises. Fast forward a decade, and now you're just like writing checks all day and reading over lawsuits and dealing with scabs and dealing with, just management, and not actually being like right there on the ground floor that you were years ago, clopping away and making the sound effects. Like, I doubt, beyond that initial road show that he went on and like really sold, like a Steamboat Willie and some of the other ones, beyond that, I really doubt he was on the ground floor the same way. And the longer, and the farther you drift from that, you get more and more jaded, obviously, and you turn into a suit. That's kind of like, once you don that suit for a decade straight and you're just doing nonstop managerial tasks, then some of that part dies, I think.
yeah, the last movie he actually directed himself was King Midas in 1935, which was the first one he'd done in 5 years, and everyone, including him, hated it. So at that point, he was just kind of like, okay, I'm the ringleader, just to work in that circus vibe a little bit. But he kind of realized, like, as the primary creator, he actually wasn't that sharp. I mean, even Mickey Mouse, is it's not quite his,
Yeah.
right?
And that's not a bad thing, man. I mean, honestly, being being that incubator that is able to provide a space for creative people and come together and thrive and make things where, like 100%, at least in my mind, if Disney hadn't existed and let's say Fleischer hadn't existed, every one of these animators probably would have just been drawing stupid advertisements on the front of buildings and doing billboards, for the rest of their lives. And the fact that even though they might have been worked to the absolute bone and to depression and mental issues, but being involved with these, like, bringing things to life and these animations that are going to live far beyond any of us, like Snow White, in my mind, is probably going to live, hundreds and hundreds of years into the future, as long as the media is retained, not just for historical significance, but based on its merit alone. And that's something that it's like, I could only dream to be involved with something that transcends, hundreds of years. And I don't know, maybe I'm giving way too much credit to Disney stuff, but I feel like they've already established themselves almost as like a global conglomerate, so they have the power to instill their dynasty for 500 years without question.
Yeah, Disney, the dude, obviously had more hand on the tiller in this, but I sort of think of it as like the Garfunkel factor, because for years I was like, well, Paul Simon does everything. I mean, what's Garfunkel even doing there? Paul Simon plays guitar, writes songs, does most of the lead vocals. I'm like, but and then I finally had the realization, but it wouldn't be Simon and Garfunkel without Garfunkel. Like, though the dumbbell again are being weighed very much in one direction, you do need both elements there, right?
Yeah, I
I'll
mean,
ride that with.
and music producer is a real thing, and producers aren't just guys that put up the money and like everyone just like runs and does it. Like, there's very much a, like, scouting the right talent and knowing like what people to work with together, and seeing if someone has a weakness, either helping them overcome it and seeing a strength and having someone lean into it more than they would if wouldn't push them to do it. And I've kind of, it's such a hard thing to describe until you've seen the dynamic. But one of my cheesy analogies that I always bring up when I'm talking to like a new artist or a writer that I'm about to work with And I always, and this might be a really, really bad one, please tell me if it's like overly cheesy, but I kind of see like a really good producer is like you've hired a private chef to cater some huge event at your house, and you've got all your friends and family over and everything, and you're just like dropping this private chef off in your kitchen, but it was your job to stock the pantry, and it was your job to make sure that the oven was clean and big enough, and that you didn't invite too many people, and that you've got enough silverware. Like it's your job to make sure the environment is the most conducive environment you could possibly, create for this chef, so that they have nothing but, success set up for them. And if anything hinders them at any point, like the ovens, one of the burners wasn't working, or like, oh, you ran out of salt, or I couldn't find the this or the that, like that's your fault as the homeowner that hired that chef to come in. And this analogy being like the producer, whether you're producing animation or you're producing a music album, like the producer on a music album, like if we go to like Brian Wilson or something, is like a really obvious example. He's the guy that's like, no, you go stand in that corner, and we're going to put a mic over here, and then you guys go stand in that corner, and I want to separate, the drums from the left and the right, and I want to move things around a little bit and get some more like stereophonic, sound going. Like that's the producer doing that. That's not the musicians coming up with a strum. That's someone like standing outside the process and thinking at like a much higher meta level. Like, how do these pieces fit together? How can I make sure that these pieces combine in a way that the sum is so much greater than, or that the whole is so much greater than the sum of its parts?
The metaphor stands. I'll just pick on the one thing just for fun, and because I'm a music dork. That,
okay.
Brian Wilson never would have made anything stereophonic.
Sorry, that might have been a little bit lambastic, but yeah, sorry.
No,
he also got swindled out of all of his money and credit. So
yeah, and McCartney as well, right?
Yeah, but, very true.
But the other one I was thinking of was Andy Warhol producing the Velvet Underground and Nico, in which his method was just, I'm in the room.
Yeah, okay. Fair point. It's a very fair point.
But
I think there might even been like some Salvador Dali projects like that too, where he was like, I'm in the room and you're doing creative things, therefore like osmosis, right? Creative osmosis almost.
I mean, I'm not giving the guy credit. He did set up the entire scene that allowed the Velvet Underground to be in that moment anyway, so we'll give him some credit. But he was there. He was just like, okay, I think the best thing I could do is just like sit on the couch and let these guys do what they're going to do.
And honestly, maybe that, like, sometimes in work and life, like sometimes a good manager is the one that's like, my team knows how to run itself. I'll just step back and help out if someone runs into a problem, as opposed to micromanaging.
Right, because people are like, oh, micromanaging's so annoying, but for the manager, that's super stressful doing that. It's not just the employees having to deal with it. And that's again where Dumbo works so well. This really is the one where they were just kind of left to do their thing, and it came out quite well. Excuse me. One thing, I guess we should get into a little bit.
Let's just start going through chronologically. There's so many tangents.
We got storks. I don't know. I feel like that's finally kind of fallen out of the lexicon. I mean, you and I see it, we still think of it, but I think kids know where babies come from for the most part.
I made that exact same note. I literally wrote, babies come from storks. Wait, is this still a common thing today? Does any kid, because I don't even think that's even in cartoons anymore. I mean, that was in multiple cartoons all the way up through like Tiny Toons, I think in like the 90s, were still have like a stork character. And even like the Vlastic pickle guy, I'm pretty sure delivered babies at some point, unless that's a Mandela effect of some kind.
There actually was a CGI animated storks movie about 5 years ago, come to think of it. So maybe that
did they deliver babies?
Theory. Yeah.
Okay.
but by that it was, it's kind of meta. Of course, it had like, like hip voice actors or whatever. So it might have been like taking a piss at the fact that nobody really buys the concept anymore.
No one actually
I don't remember
cares anymore.
Yeah,
everyone just Googles it and they're like, oh wow, that's how babies are made. Okay.
With the opening scenes, I definitely noticed with the WDP Circus that
Walt Disney Productions.
Yeah. I think I crossed a lot of wires with this and the actual little engine that could storybook. So I feel like the book was actually predated this by a few years. So I was kind of wondering, was that like a direct riff here? Casey Jr.
I think I
the
can.
train. Yeah, because Casey Jr.'s got that like tracheotomy voice, so you know,
So
kind of doing
I
the
had a
same.
couple notes in this whole intro segment too. The biggest one that caught me by surprise is that I never realized until today that this essentially starts in Florida. It's somewhere a little bit west of Miami, but it's essentially at like the southern tip, southern central Florida, and that's where they drop Dumbo and all these other animals off. And that, I don't know, that blew my mind. I had no idea that Dumbo started in Florida. And
Yeah,
then another thing, sorry, go ahead.
no, it's, they got that big map, and it's like, oh, it looks like at least Big Thunder Mountain's already there, although it was green,
Yeah.
so that's not
At
for
one
real.
point they show him going directly through Orlando. I don't think that was foreshadowing, but it was a cool coincidence.
Yeah, if you're gonna have people going through Florida, going up through the middle, kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I guess so. But one thing that I don't know if you caught this, and this one I felt was kind of interesting, and it made me feel like maybe I was looking for like occult vibes, but the storks, they're singing this song, and the movie starts out almost with like a magic incantation, although that's the beginning is almost where like the occult feeling ended for me. But when they're talking about the storks, and I'm not going to repeat it verbatim because I didn't like write down the actual lyrics, but it's something along the lines of like the storks are coming for you, whether you're a millionaire, whether you're a butcher, you can't hide from us, like we're going to find you regardless. And visually they were talking about like, we're bringing you life, we're bringing you these new babies that maybe you're not even expecting, and like, hey, now you got a baby and deal with it. But the things that they were saying, like if you weren't watching the video and if you were just looked away and were listening to them, it sounds like they're like the harbingers of death, like they're coming for you, whether you're a millionaire or whether you're a butcher. Like, you can't hide from us, we're going to get you. And just the fact that like them bringing new life feels like what's the difference between delivering new life and delivering death, when you've abstracted it to the point of like a bird flies out of the sky and does something. So I don't know, and they kept singing it, and they kept like emphasizing more and more about how you can't hide from them, and that they'll find everybody eventually, whether you're a millionaire or a butcher. And that specific line, whether you're a millionaire or a butcher, has much deeper connotations that I won't bring us on a wild tangent, but it very explicitly to me means death, not birth.
That kind of contrasts with the Mr. Idiot stork who delivers Dumbo.
Yeah.
I don't think he had an actual name, because he that's when I actually thought he was giving an incantation, because for whatever reason the other storks just get to like dive bomb the young, right, and leave.
Yeah, they
Where
just drop them from
Mr.
way up
Idiot
high.
stork, he needs to land and like do a whole like
He's got a
like
special
singing
delivery.
telegram. Yeah, he's got to do that whole like he's the one that I thought was doing an incantation, right? Because he does that poem, but his poem does work when you're looking away from the screen. It's clear what he's talking about, because he's
Yeah,
like a
it's a fair
baby to bring you
point.
joy. So
And he says it two different ways. So he clearly either cared about it or he was like, told, hey, say these two different ways.
but he calls that the service, right? Which I guess the other storks don't do service. And so I do. This is a tangent again, but service in Japan is when you go out to eat and they give you a little bit extra, which is why I've eaten both locust and whale sperm, not sperm whale sperm.
So I'm curious, is this like through a straw? Do you slurp it? Is it cooked so you can like eat it with a fork and knife?
In the fork and knife, it was fried whale sperm,
Okay. Okay.
and and then one of our coworkers was like, "How do they jerk off the whale?" We're like, "Oh, Maddie, they kill the whale." Maddie not being me, by the way.
That
But
seems inefficient because then you can't produce any more sperm.
we don't really know that. It was just
If
well,
you keep
honestly,
it alive, it's like an endless supply, is it not?
yeah. Well, you have to find them in the ocean, right? So
I wonder if they have like really fancy restaurants, like where some you can go and pick out the lobster that you want. If like you could walk in and you got a selection of whales and you're like, I want that one's sperm.
yeah, that would be an interesting restaurant. Maybe they can put that at the Living Seas and Epcot Center.
I'll have a little extra Brian the whale, please.
What was it? Hitchhikers, or Restaurant at the End of the Universe, where the cow comes and tries to sell you parts of its own body. My rump is very tender. Why don't you eat that?
That won't be along for too much longer.
Yeah. So I was like thinking Dumbo would tick the Immaculate Conception box, but I guess all the animals in this world are made that way. Um,
Yeah, and what's funny is like aside from the sexual confusion that this might present a kid for 10 years into the future thinking that children just appear out of nowhere, but there's also a point when the stork is bringing Dumbo into the elephants, and when he like tries to give it to this lady of, you know, like gossiper elephants, one of them is like offended, like how dare you, like I would even have sex, but there is no sex because they just appear out of the sky. And then when they actually deliver Dumbo to his mom, and by the way, I've completely forgot that his name is actually Jumbo Jr., not Dumbo. Dumbo is like a nasty name that one of the ladies called him and he just adopted. But anyways, when Jumbo Jr., aka Dumbo, is delivered to his mom, the mom is like bashful. She's like blushing and like covers up her face with her ears, like, oh, who me? No, I wouldn't have had intercourse with anybody. Where did this baby come from? But you know, watching that as a kid, I didn't have any idea that, you know, there was like these reactions and like being embarrassed or being offended that you would have had a kid. But watching it now, it was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting dynamic that they're like they're shaming another elephant for just having a kid, period.
Yeah, and her name's still, and Dumbo's original name is still Jumbo. I mean, it's not like that's
Jumbo
not an
Jr.
Jumbo Jr.
Jr.
I'm
Yeah.
like, Jumbo sounds like that started as an insult as well.
Right.
I mean, that's not much better. That's the thing. Yeah, my nose. Oh, Dumbo, sick burn. You know, I'm like, Jumbo's already there, folks. That doesn't sound great. Watching them build the circus after that, I recently saw the remake of Nightmare Alley, so that was definitely like going through my mind. Also, you said you had something to say about the workers in this case, but I definitely was like, man, Frozen basically does the scene at the beginning, and Hi Ho. We keep having the menial labor song in all these movies.
Oh yeah, although the hi ho one I feel like is way more jovial. Like they were enjoying their work and they were just doing it because it's the only thing that they knew how to do. And the esoteric connotations of that made it, you know, it didn't have like as dark of a feeling because they were like earth elementals doing their thing in their element, you know. It's like they were like pigs in mud essentially. Even though to us going underground and just digging away at dirt forever sounds like a horrible menial task, but for them it was like that's their, you know, that's their fish and water thing. For this one though, they clearly have a bunch of black guys getting off the train and just going doing manual labor and singing songs, and then they juxtapose that with the elephants doing the exact same thing, pounding stakes into the ground to put up these tents. And to me it was like this very direct correlation of like these are the beasts of burden working within this circus. And for whatever very interesting artistic direction, they didn't give any of the workers faces. There would just be just a sphere for the head.
Yeah, that also might allude to the fact that the atmosphere working at Disney Studios was probably a lot nicer 5 years previous, or well, no, 3 years previous. It wasn't even that long. I guess it would have been 4 years, 5 years when they were working on Snow White. So maybe it was a cheerier job putting in all that work, whereas by this point it was a little more of a slog.
Maybe I have to feel like it was a slog from day one for most
It,
of
it
them.
was a slog, but maybe a
Once
more
the high
enjoyable
ran off
slog.
after like 3 months of sitting at that table with blisters, you're like, all right, the high's worn off. Now I'm not sure if this was a great idea.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the changes where it seeped a little more into animation by this point. So
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
okay, where do we go?
Well,
Is
so
it?
so the train, they set up the tent, so then they have their first big show, and this is, you know, Dumbo's first appearance out in public as an elephant or as being part of the circus.
Oh, right. And at this point, his only task is waving a flag, which he can't quite manage. But hey, I have to make 2-year-olds go out and perform for their parents sometimes, so I get it.
And I
uh,
don't know, this was such a stupid and small moment, but for whatever reason, it made me laugh. There was a part where they show a camel and the camel's mouth is like clearly full of spit, and it looks like the camel's like looking around for a place to spit and can't find it, and it just swallows it. And I just thought that was such a random little clip, but I loved it so much.
I do need to share one of the more fun little kid presentations I've had recently, where we were filming a video for the moms for Christmas time, and everyone's just supposed to kind of wave and smile and say Merry Christmas. And I got the one kid who's, he's a little troublesome in class. He's not that bad, but he's screaming Merry Christmas with a BS smile on his face, like double barreling like middle fingers. So it's like I don't think the Japanese staff knows. So I'm like, I'm just gonna let that happen. That's great. Also, it's not, I mean, it's not really like that offensive in Japan. Most people don't even know what that means. So the kid had clearly learned somewhere, but
this sounds like a fun inside joke that you get to enjoy and other people don't.
exactly, that's right. Which again, this movie has a lot of those. I did notice it might have been just in the show or just after the show where they had the water animation, and that was definitely the moment where I could be like, oh yeah, this is a cost saving movie, because you think about the Fantasia water animation, which is insane, and here it is. It still looks cool, but it's very streamlined.
Yeah, but I think the point of the water here was a prop as opposed to Fantasia. The water was almost a character.
Yeah. But I mean, a big point of Dumbo in general was we are going to cut as many corners as we can, so this movie will actually make some money. I think
honestly, I loved it, man. I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's impossible to know what like the detailed high budget version of this would have been, but I'm still enamored with the entire movie end to end, and even the places where I can tell they were cut. If you compare it to like a cartoon that you might have seen in the last 10 years, it's like, oh yeah, this is a masterpiece.
Well, I think art often does benefit from some limitations. Like Fantasia basically has no limitations. It's a masterpiece. It's not nearly as fun to sit down and just watch as Dumbo is, So
and also I was quite happy to see that Dumbo was like almost an even 60 minutes, and it's over real quick. I mean, like by the time I even was wondering like, hey, how far long is this movie? It was like over half over. And there's some other Disney movies that get much longer, and just the pacing, this one, if anything, it ends a little bit early in my opinion. So I don't know, I love that. Like, it might be unrelated to the budget, or it might be directly related, that it might have been a little bit shorter and faster paced, but it worked. Like, it checked all the boxes for me.
This was conceived as a short. It was just a 10-minute short, and it was expanded to feature length. So I think that was basically as much as they could stretch it. In the wake of Snow White's profits, they basically went and bought like every storybook right they could, which Dumbo would have been one of those. So yeah. I mean, again, the limitations I find are fascinating. They're fun to talk about, but the perfect brew ends up here. And yeah, like I said, this actually is pretty much my favorite Disney movie, except for days when I decide it's Lilo and Stitch instead. And Lilo and Stitch basically had the same creation process. That really was the B. Well, you were probably closer to the ground on that, but that really was the B team for a straight to video movie, and it just worked out where they're like, hey, this is actually good. Let's put it in the theater.
Oh yeah, and they killed it with like all the Happy Meal toys and everything too. Like, it was a huge hit.
And maybe that's where I like Stitch slightly better, because he's like psychotic and violent, where Dumbo is nothing but sweet.
and speaking of that, man, like I actually had to start keeping what I called a feels meter as I was watching this every time. And again, I don't know if it was probably more of nostalgia of just like, being a little kid that didn't have to worry about anything, because I was literally ages 3 to 10, or probably less than that, 3 to like 6, when I saw this the most number of times. But so like the first one was you mentioned that the little train that could just hearing that just reminded me of like, man, this is probably when I discovered like maybe the first elements of like beatboxing, and just like this kind of like onomatopoeia style music creation, where you start with a noise, and then the noise turns into a rhythm, and then the rhythm turns into a melody. And that was this train exactly. So for whatever reason, like I didn't exactly like tear up, but I felt a feeling when I was like, man, that like there's some kind of DNA in this. And then the second big one was after this first show, Dumbo is like playing with his mom, and they're just playing peekaboo. But like you said, it's like the most genuine, wholesome game of peekaboo you could ever imagine. And then that hit my feels meter. That was my feel number 2.
I was trying to figure out who the redheaded kid that makes Jumbo go nuts. I know he was based on someone, which I haven't found, but I have found that actually Dumbo was made by the remaining B team, with the A team was on Bambi. Disney observed that Dumbo was an obvious straight cartoon and that the animators that were assigned on Bambi were not appropriate for a look of Dumbo. So that's kind of interesting. So both cases are true, it seems. But yeah, I feel like I've read before that redheaded kid is actually based on someone, but
yeah, that's interesting. And after you mentioned the clowns, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
yeah, it's like has to be at this point. But
And not just that, but like we had mentioned on a couple other ones, when you're talking about animation and the amount of frames and production that goes into just one person saying a word, let alone that redhead had very articulated movements and had very specific dialogue lines. Like, someone spent the equivalent of like the man equivalent of months just animating and voicing over and refining that guy to be in there. So there's a very specific reason why that guy had that look and said those things, even if it might be lost a little bit, to time.
so I also do a Twilight Zone podcast, and there's some episodes where I'm like, I can't just do this episode with, well, basically two middle-aged white guys talking about it. So I'm broaching a topic here where I would like to have a different voice, but we are here talking now. So let's bring it up. There's a Twilight Zone episode, The Big Tall Wish. It's as far as I can tell, the first time we had an African-American lead on TV. And he alludes to the fact he's got a bunch of scars and, just talking about, the scars in our flesh being like deep-seated things. And my guest on there was talking about how, a lot of Black men even today kind of feel like they can't protect their woman, that even with the whole Will Smith slap thing, that kind of came through there a little bit, right? And you mentioned the whole, like, the elephants and the workers being equated as beasts of burden. So we have Jumbo, basically her parental instinct, her motherly instinct, catching in, and there's nothing she could do about it, which is kind of like, I that's just coming to me now, but I'm like, I'm probably reading in too much maybe, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, the beast of burden trying to assert itself and being slapped down is kind of a major theme.
And it's honestly the most heartbreaking scene of the entire movie by far.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to, yeah, again, I'm pretty sure the Disney Corporation 1940 was not like trying to put this particular message in, but I'm
Right.
like, but I think it even if it's inadvertent, it kind of does come through that way. And I'm like, that's why once we get to our Baby Mind song, it makes it that much, more heartbreaking, right? Because yeah, it's like people want to feel like, especially, not to be like sexist, but a man wants to be able to like protect their family, right? So, and Jumbo is a single mom, so she's trying to protect her family. And
I don't, unless I missed it, I don't think there's any male elephants in the movie at all aside from Dumbo. And I guess I'm assuming Dumbo's gender there, not that it has any role in the movie, but I don't think I even saw a male elephant, period.
No, I got to the point where because I've always assumed Dumbo is male, and when I was watching it, I was like, are we sure? Is Dumbo a daughter?
I mean, it never really comes up. There's never a plot point where it's only resolved by the gender of Dumbo. So I guess it remains ambiguous, no?
So yeah, we should point out that we do not know Dumbo's pronouns. So
and if they're in the movie, they were assumed most likely.
Yeah.
But I want to mention too, because the part where Jumbo starts protecting Jumbo Jr. Or Dumbo, is because like the kids are making fun of it, and then one of the kids crosses the line by actually like interacting with Dumbo and pulling his ears and trying to rip him away from the mom. So then she starts fighting back, and then that's perceived as, oh, this elephant's gone wild. Not in like a sexy 90s DVD way, but like this this elephant's lost its mind, it's like trampling people. But it she clearly wasn't. She was just encouraging people to stop messing with their kid. But the part that I think is a little bit more heartbreaking is that if you imagine actual circuses in the late 30s, early 40s, I mean, if an elephant got out of line, what they portray in the cartoon here is a much lighter version of what they actually would do. And even in the cartoon, they whip the elephant like in the face, and then they actually start jabbing the elephant with like sharp, almost like coal pokers, like bayonets on the end of sticks. And they don't actually penetrate her body in the cartoon for obvious reasons, but just the fact that they show like them jabbing these sharp things at the elephant and missing. I mean, these were things that were actually happening to elephants at a circus. If it, didn't walk in a straight line, it would get jabbed by a freaking poker that would, lacerate its skin. And just kind of seeing that it was like, that was the light version, but I almost need to see an even lighter version where they're like poking it with pool noodles or like, like little like flower bouquets, like poke, poke, poke. But it was like, yeah, they would literally, like, if this weren't a kid's movie, you'd see blood coming out right now.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, since I started like doing more podcasting critical analysis or just like thinking about things, a whole point of the Star Wars franchise, and this does come through in the Obi-Wan show that's on now, is the measure of a person is how they treat their droids, So, and in the
Maybe,
circus,
yeah, I guess so.
the measure is how you treat.
I don't know
animals.
if I'm ready to take that step into assigning human characteristics to my computer overlords yet, and I hope that does not reflect poorly upon me in the future, computer overlords.
Yeah, we all have. Well, yeah, I was caught screaming obscenities at my iPhone a few months ago, so but I usually don't. But yeah, it's like saying thank you to the AI, I don't know. It seems reasonable to do so.
That's a really great litmus test, because you can tell your Amazon or your Google speech device to shut up, and it's the same as stop a lot of the time. But sometimes if like I say that and someone else is around, like they actually, it seems like they get offended on the AI's behalf. Like, did you just tell it to shut up? It's like, yeah, it's just the same command as saying stop. There's no difference between the two. But yeah, I might just be digging my grave, and I might be, regretting this, horribly in the future. So
right. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, how we beget, that's a big thing. Like, how do we start to? That's a completely different topic. But how do we treat emerging intelligences that may or may not be artificial, right? But you're putting that psychic, vibe into the ether, so to speak, right? So even if it's an inanimate object, you're still putting the thought into the ether. So I guess that's something to consider.
maybe. I mean, how woo-woo do you want to get?
I'm just like, it's like, I mean, every once in a while, I'm totally into like just like headbanging to a bit of metal, but I tend not to listen to a bunch of it because I'm like, man, if you surround yourself with dark things get dark, So.
Yeah, well, not just that. It's almost like if you just had nothing but the news on all day, like it would be impossible to not just be a doom and gloomer, because all you're hearing are like the most sensational, horrible things. And if you just surround yourself, or just bury your head in the sand, you might end up being a lot happier and have a more optimistic outlook. But yeah, separate tangent.
No, that's a plus in Japan because I don't really watch TV, and when I do see it in the dining room, it's Japanese news, which is one, more chilled, and two, in Japanese, which my Japanese isn't that great, so I can mostly tune it out. So yeah, I should probably go watch an American news show just to see the contrast, because it's been so long since I've seen one.
Just don't.
I shouldn't. I'm just saying out of curiosity, because I literally haven't seen an American news show for probably a decade.
It's almost like, man, I should go out and just like smoke a little hit of meth just to see what I've been missing out on.
What was it? An Anchorman 2? Well, now we know you can't smoke crack on live television. So this is where Timothy Mouse shows up. I was actually surprised how long it takes for Timothy to show up in the movie, because he's basically like the second character you think of.
Well, and it's also interesting because like the stork almost seems like the stork could have been the side. It was a shoe-in to be the sidekick, but the stork just is irrelevant the second Dumbo is delivered, which felt a little bit like disjointed to me. Like I don't know, this might be too much of like a Chekhov's gun mentality, with like Chekhov's gun is like, if you present a gun in act 1, then it needs to go off by act 3. It's like, don't ever show a detail that doesn't play into the story, which doesn't always have to be true. It's almost like a trope. But it's, for me, like I always think that like, oh, this character in the beginning is going to have to play some kind of a role, and the stork's just like, nope, I'm here, I'm gone. And then you get Timothy the Mouse, which I love way more than the stork, just to be clear. And actually, And again, nostalgia may be talking, but I think this mouse sidekick might be my favorite Disney sidekick out of any of them, even beyond Jiminy Cricket, which I think was my previous favorite sidekick.
I I can go with that. I was noting when he shows up, he's kind of a Greek chorus of one. I guess because Dumbo doesn't talk and can't express his own feelings. When Timothy shows up, he shows there to basically do that before even introducing himself.
He kind of describes like, oh, look, the elephant's sad, or oh, look, now we're happy. Like he kind of is describing the things that Dumbo can't say for him or herself.
Oh, this is just an absurdist statement, but hey, sometimes those are the ones that take traction. I just wrote, I bet Timothy Mouse is just the demiurge getting bored and interacting. But in the case of this movie, or almost because we have a mouse, it's the studio a mouse built, different mouse, but yeah.
Okay, I can
Just
go with that. I can go with that.
again, I know I'm reading in too much, but sometimes the subconscious thoughts tend to take on a life of its own.
Well, to me, this was actually hit me in a strange way, but Timothy Mouse came across as an absolute racist in this movie to me. And it had nothing at all to do with the crows, in case that's where you thought it was going. Nothing to do with the crows. But there's a few statements that Timothy Mouse makes, and the dialect is very blatantly like a New York cab driver. Like even like the dialect and like the slang that he uses. I think I took a couple of notes down of oh, he says we need to get your mudder out of the clink. Like he says it this way that couldn't be anything other than like a Chicago or New York, Italian mafioso. And then he's trying to make Dumbo feel better about their ears. And he says, it ain't nobody's fault you got them big ears, kid. And it's just like, I love that sort of like talk. Maybe it was because at this time I also was growing up in New York, and I think a lot of family members were like Italian and had, they might lean into that just to like be funny and play with the voice. But to back up my Timothy Mouse is a racist, and this isn't just a salacious statement, but he says something later on, and it's when the clowns are starting to plot against Dumbo, and he says, you come from a proud race of pachyderms. But the way that he says this is like, you come from this superior race, you're way above clowns. So don't even try to associate, don't compare yourself with these others because you come from such a superior race. And just the fact that 1940s, and it's like a very expressive, New York taxi cab mafioso personality, and just like the timing and the expression and just the context of this one statement, I was like, it's really hard not to hear that as like literally a white guy in a studio behind a microphone talking about a superior race.
Yeah, yeah. I was also thinking of Tim Mouse. Tim Mouse. I guess I got tired of writing Timothy. Um,
Does his name actually come up? Do they actually say Timothy Mouse
I'm not
in the
sure.
movie?
I'm
Because
not
I don't
actually.
remember. I think I would have written his name down if it had come up in the movie itself.
Yeah, that might be a got it from somewhere else sort of thing. Again, I just read the book, so they were writing Timothy Mouse in there. But one thing, just to get into weird conspiracy theories, as one is wont to do, is he's basically like psychic driving the circus master.
So this one I just kept writing amazing over this note, because again, I haven't seen this since I was a child, and seeing this, not just the concept of, and just to describe the scene, the ringleader is going into his tent, and we can kind of eavesdrop on him, and he's trying to think of like some great big climax that'll impress all the people that go to his show, but he can't think of it. And he says quite specifically, he's like, maybe it'll come to me in a dream. And he lays down, and just that alone, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool that, like this concept of sort of like astral projection, or like, hearkening into your REM subconscious or whatever, and driving, pulling creative ideas out of that. But then, and it surprised me, like after he goes to sleep, yeah, so Timothy Mouse walks up, waits for the guy to go to sleep, he hits a freaking pocket watch, which is like a known, hypnotist sort of accessory. He hits it, and that kind of like puts the guy into like a deeper trance essentially. And then the specific commands that Timothy Mouse even says are almost, word for word Miltonian hypnotism, which is, he starts with a command and he says, now concentrate. And just the way that he says it started with now, which is like a very direct, like it puts you in the moment. And then how he commands concentrate, that way of like injecting someone by taking them out of their frame of reference by saying now, and then immediately shouting a command is absolute legitimate hypnotist sort of techniques, and it's like an NLP technique. And if you ever see any of the guys that do like the stage performance magic, the ones that like immediately put someone to sleep, or even the televangelists that like tap someone's head and they immediately fall down, it's the exact same technique. It starts with like a soft like, now Jesus, and they hit you as they scream it, and that surprises your senses, like the kinetic feel of something hitting you unexpectedly, but also just like hearing this thing, and it's like the climax of this anticipation and nervous energy, and it's like bam, and it's like you're giving the person an excuse to kind of like fall into this deeper state and start receiving commands. And then after he says that, he just specifically tells them, you are now getting to the climax of the show, Dumbo, 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 and he walks away. So anyways, that this was 100% an example of actual mind programming as far as you can take it in the terms of Miltonian hypnotism.
Yeah. If you want to get really specific, I wrote down the quote, climax at the pentacle of your pyramid, which sounds a touch wrong.
It does. Yeah, I wrote that exact same quote down, and it's just a fun note. I'm not going to read too much into it, but man, because I've often said that the MK Ultra and the Project Monarch crossover between Disney and stuff, it's pretty much like post 50s, or at least it's like after World War II was done and wrapped up and paperclip was over. But man, this one kind of makes me reset and walk that back a little bit, because this is mind programming, like a how-to guide almost. Like if you did this to your parent, like if you watched this as a kid and you were like, I'm gonna go and wait for my parents to sleep and just whisper subliminal images and direct commands into them, I mean, there is a non-zero chance that would have an actual reproducible effect.
No, as an experienced teacher, I sometimes I'm very specifically using my voice in a certain way, not Dune level or anything, but like I know if I say it this way, like the kids will probably respond in this way. So that's I guess that technically is MPL.
Well, I mean that's the whole entire concept of rhetoric, which is an entire skill that's just not taught as its own field anymore, but it's just knowing how to say things and who to say them to and how to pause and how to give different intonations with the way that you say stuff.
Because I gotten chill enough. I never actually get angry, but every once in a while I'm like, okay, to make the situation rectify, I have to actually use
right.
angry voice now. So
yeah, a lot of people know it as teacher voice, right?
Yeah. Which honestly, I don't do so much. I don't even remember doing that recently. So I guess that's experience.
Well, move back to the States, and you'll probably have to relearn that.
Yeah, good point. So we have that brings us to our baby mine scene, of course, where you mentioned Brian Wilson. He covered that a few years ago. So bunch of Disney songs actually.
Oh well, actually, hold on. Before we get to the saddest part where like they're embracing and the baby mine, but right before that there's another sort of like an occult thing that I tapped into, and that's that all of the elephants get together and they take a solemn vow, and they all put their trunks up, and solemn vow almost being like they're in some kind of like a society together, and that this is like a binding and a normal occurrence that they would all a pachyderms exactly. But it was interesting that they come together and declare that Dumbo is no longer an elephant because he has been degraded down to the level of clown. And at this point, we see Clown Dumbo, and Clown Dumbo is 100% creepy. And there's a clown. So there's Dumbo the elephant dressed as a clown in clown makeup, but there's also a clown that's dressed up as Dumbo as a clown, which is kind of like a meta thing, but that dude is really creepy too. And then there's also this collection of like 10 or 15 like little firemen guys with little axes and stuff, and they also giving me like super creep vibes like that. I might actually legitimately have nightmares about these faceless clowns with axes running around and letting people burn to death.
Well, they were given Disney nightmares if they were the striking animators.
That's true. That it might have been just like an illustrated sort of nightmare. And then the final note about this one is that after he finishes the performance, despite everyone loving it, he just kind of like hates being this clown, and he's crying and he's feeling bad for himself. And his freaking sidekick is taking his tears and rubbing it on soap, and then using the soap to bathe him in his own tears, which has all kinds of cool occult connotations. But also outside of occult, just like what a cool, symbolic scene there, that you might just be watching it and just like, oh, he's getting a bath now, but to step back and be like, he's being bathed in his own tears and like washing off this shame and this clown makeup, which sort of removed him from his identity of being part of this, pack of pachyderms. But like the fact that it's his tears that are bathing him from this experience has such a much deeper symbolic meaning. I feel it was, it was almost like genius level kind of approach to it, even though it's such a small, tiny little detail. I just loved it.
Well, yeah, I guess a transformative thing, right? Which is where this movie, basically, this is where the transformations begin. For the next 15 minutes of the movie is that I guess it's just weird. Like I said, Timothy Mouse didn't show up till halfway in.
Right.
Dumbo's real journey doesn't start till we're like 75% into the movie. So, because this is basically where we're like I guess the plot's been going, but this is kind of where things really start happening. It's mostly been a downer. I guess that's where the storybook animation's so nice, because everything looks nice, even though everything feels horrible. Says, yeah, you said Tim was a bit racist, or the elephants, as you mentioned, and well, I guess so was most of 1941.
Oh yeah, very much. But I also think that the mouse was racist in such a casual way that he wasn't written to be that. It was just like an inherent part of just a normal, average Joe that they kind of based him on, which in itself is like even more racist than if they had intentionally included it.
Well, that's why so many from multiple studios stick disclaimers on their old animations these days.
Yeah, right. You're 100% right. Yeah, and actually, this Dumbo being one of them, although I think it's because of the crows, more so. And I think these are the same crows that come up in Song of the South, just modified slightly.
Yeah. So are we with Mom again?
So we're with Mom. So this is the hardest scene to watch. I legitimately had to stop it a few times and like take my mind off of being like so engrossed in the movie, and like went and did something technical, and then like, okay, yeah, it's just an animation, and then like the feels would come back and I'd have to take another break. But man, it's just like, so she's locked up for going mad, and she's chained with all four of her feet, and she can't see out the window, and Dumbo is too small to see in the window, so neither of them can make eye contact, but they can make physical contact with just like the very ends of their two trunks. So they have this like interaction, they're like hugging and they're singing, and then the mom's trunk comes out through the window, and Dumbo, basically it turns into like a little cradle for Dumbo to cry and fall asleep into. And like, holy shit, I feel like if they did have like a serial killer or psychopath test, like you could just make them watch this a few times, and if you don't detect any sort of emotions, you're like, okay, we're just going to put you in solitary confinement just to be safe.
So I was asked to draw a psychopath son on the board yesterday. So that's who doesn't like, that's who doesn't. They're like crazy. One kid did. I think psychopath is like Japanese English now. So so I got a nice son up. That's the guy that doesn't like Dumbo's a baby mind scene though, for sure.
It's a litmus test, and I'd stand by it.
Of course, the only way to get past that's to drink it off, which is exactly what they do by accident.
And we never find out what that was, do we?
Oh no, we don't.
Because Dumbo drinks it, but the premise, it seems that both of them think it's water, and that Dumbo has the hiccups just from getting normal hiccups, and Timothy Mouse has like a trick to get rid of the hiccups really quick, and it's to take a big gulp of water and hold your breath and then gulp it down really quick. But as soon as Dumbo does that, he gets instantly drunk, And then Timothy Mouse looks at it and he says something like, what kind of water is this anyway? And then he falls in and he comes out drunk, but it's like green and soapy and like, what the hell was it? Like, what?
Jägermeister.
So there's just a big bucket of alcohol sitting outside of a tent. I don't know.
That's how clowns party.
I guess so. It might just be like a jungle juice or something, right?
Yeah. But yeah, because then we get into our pink elephants. Now, of course, you mentioned the fantastic bubble animation, so I'll throw that again. But I do find the pink elephant sequence pretty much the gold standard for tripped out animation, which is interesting that it predates the invention of LSD by a couple of years.
Well, allegedly.
Okay, they had some peyote around probably.
Well, and they
Something
had
like that.
ergot. They had
Yeah.
the actual fungus that they just hadn't synthesized LSD yet.
Right. Well, that was just a cheeky statement anyway. You could find stuff to have psychedelic visions, and hey, I'm not saying that the Disney staff was doing that, but it's a pretty psychedelic vision here. So
I feel like somebody was like, no, like this wasn't a room full of absolute squares that came up with this entirely on their own. Like someone had an actual psychedelic experience involved with this movie. I'm convinced of it with absolutely no proof to back that up. But there's also a note here that they get shit-faced and they have amazing hallucination, like psychedelic hallucinations, and they look like they're having the time of their lives doing it, and there is absolutely no true negative consequence to this at all. And I feel like this might have also planted some deep seed in my brain that was like, inebriation good, no consequences needed to worry about, you'll be just fine.
This is where my researcher for this episode's notes probably step in as he's writing Dumbo and Timothy Q Mouse. Okay, he's got more than that. Got blustered, buggered, blottered on barrel of water infused with champagne. Just an accident, man. Or was it grooving with DMT ayahuasca? You get that? Worth fucking 5 minutes plus of Disney's oh so precious time. Yeah, of course. A good excuse anyway for a Concorde flight from reality.
Oh, what a great observation, because I mean, I don't know, this is a huge assumption on my part, but I feel like the creation of this like psychedelic trip might have been like a like a subverted attempt of like, hey, we put drugs in your movie, Disney, or something along those lines of like, hey, we got hippie beatnik shit in this movie now, deal with it.
Well, Scott's notes here respond to you. An MK Ultra imbued 5-minute piece custom made to traumatize kids in their lives. Shit, sure, some kids ran out of the cinema screaming back in the day when it screened. Quite the wild card was old Walt Elias Disney. Good fun to the 33rd degree. Parade that down your drain, the main vein, Main Street. Okay. Now, like I said, these are beat poetry notes.
It's hard, again, like I said, like I usually push back on pre-1950s Disney MK Ultra connections, but man, the freaking Timothy Q Mouse doing the mind control programming on the Circus Master, it has humbled me. So I will submit that maybe we can relate MK Ultra directly as early as Dumbo.
I could just start keep reading this dude's notes. He'll be glad I'm reading them anyway. Morphing of a bubble into an elephant. We've all been there, marching in unison, herds of pachyderms, a Nazi psychedelic trip, a psychic assault on the astral form of the intoxicated, souls of children caught in the middle of the vicious technicolor romp. Who the fuck likes marching in unison with others? Okay.
These are fair points.
Yeah, that's why I had him do this, because I was like, okay, for that section, he's gonna have better insights, a little more magic.
Well, and I would also to just to push back, or maybe just to jazz on that a little bit and improvise, the marching and like synchronization. Yeah, there's obviously like a military aspect of that, like who the hell likes that, but also just the psychedelic experience itself. It comes in waves, almost like the same way as like your circadian rhythm, or like your heart beating, pumping blood through. So like your heart pumping your blood is very much driving your senses through a psychedelic experience. So it's always going to have some sort of like a structured like rate to it. It's gonna be at 120 BPM because your body is literally running at 120 heartbeats per minute. So that combined with, and I think the part where you're saying like marching around and encapsulating the children stuff, that's actually one of the coolest parts of this, where the elephants, or the pink elephants, start marching, and then once they get to the edge of the screen, they sort of like turn 90 degrees and start marching vertically. And then when they get to the top of that screen, now they're upside down, and they even say something about like look out, we're walking around the bed on our head, look out, like this weird creepy chant.
Nightmare
And as they're
music.
chanting that to music, and as they're chanting that, they're also like starting to like grow a little bit and get taller, and like they're swaying a little bit and merging into each other, and it's absolutely like a psychedelic hallucination. And this is why I feel unequivocally someone on that team was like, no, I know what we're drawing here, guys, like follow my lead.
As I just keep reading another man's notes, it's like the movie just needed an Anunnaki non-consensual LSD, Kenneth Anger, psychedelic otherworld UFO boost, apparently. So
I mean,
yeah,
it's there's a reason why we're talking about it and having so much fun with it. It is such an amazing scene. That I mean, it doesn't, this type of scene doesn't exist outside of the Dumbo movie inside the Disney universe, as far as I'm aware. You could make some points about Fantasia having some similar like psychedelic, very abstract things going on, but man, this one just standing alone as its own is probably in like the top three, if not its number one top.
oh, it honestly, it is my number one top just bit of animation. I think I again, I've seen Dumbo many times, and I've seen this part of Dumbo even more than that. We cannot try and talk a little bit about magic without noting we have a bunch of pyramids in here as well.
That's right.
Pinnacle of the pyramid turns out to be the climax, I guess. So I mean, this is the client. I mean, I know the climax is Dumbo flying, I guess, but I feel like as far as feeling goes, this is the climax of the movie. This is the circus, right? This is the, Dumbo flying's great, but the circus needs to be insanity, and that's what we get in this sequence.
That's a very valid point, actually. I 100% agree with you that the psychedelic pink elephant vision is the climax of the movie, and that Dumbo flying is almost an afterthought. Like by the time we see Dumbo flying, you look down, you're like, oh, the credits are going to be rolling in like 5 minutes from now.
Oh, here we go. Another note from him. This 5-minute mass trip out does mark a rite of passage for Dumbo, the ignorant, the neophyte, the gross uninitiated, as now he has been ritualized, circumcised, and baptized. It's a tale of transformation, excuse me. So that would make this part the climax if you wanted to read the movie that way.
I love those notes, and I couldn't agree more. And actually, I'm almost jealous that I didn't immediately identify that. Yeah, this was a baptism, and if you want to bring it all the way back to initiating the profane into the ultimate mysteries, that quite literally, especially in like Greek times, that basically involved going on a crazy hallucinogenic trip on ergot or some other combination of these things. And it was this undeniable presence of this abstract nature of God that even the most stubborn, sort of like stoic person would not be able to deny, this technicolor reality of, transdimensional being. And that very much is like exactly what Dumbo does. He has a literal baptism, and so does Timothy Mouse. And then they have an actual hallucinogenic experience, which transforms them and unlocks new potential that they didn't have before. So yeah,
They're tripping buddies now. Now, of course,
we are trip buddies.
Perhaps those in the past could come out from their 3 days of tripping in the pyramid with the solstice sun shining through the pyramid shaft. Dumbo and Timothy Mouse end up in a tree, which is just great. I mean, also it's like, obviously how we end up in a tree. We'll find that out in like 2 more minutes, right? So that is a nice little bit of streamlined storytelling for a 63-minute movie. Where's the worst place I've found myself? I haven't found myself anywhere particularly bad, I think just sleeping diagonally across like the edge of a bed is probably the weirdest place. But
oh, I've got a few. The one that I'd be most willing to share is the tamest one here, because it's not that kind of show, at least not yet. But I do remember a specific point in time of my life when I literally closed my eyes, and when I opened them back up, I was in a city 4 miles away, and I closed my eyes again and I opened them back up and I was in a city another 2 hours away. And this was in like high school, and I had like school the next morning, and I was like, you know, 7 or 8 hours away from home. And it was just because I went on some crazy adventure that
Adventure
I
Day.
remember nothing of because I just kept blacking out.
Okay, I'll share my father's stories from the Navy then. He has a couple good ones. He said he was at in Puerto Rico, went to the enlisted men's club, and they gave him some Bacardi 151, and the next thing he knew, he was 20 minutes off base in his boxer shorts in a bowling alley. So um the other one being where he had was in Morocco and went from to Tangier from like I forget where he was, but went up to Tangier, had spent all of his money, and someone tried to mug him and he didn't have anything. So the guy sat him down on his steps, pulled out a joint, and they smoked that instead. So I don't quite have those
I feel
stories.
you, brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and that actually reminds me. I brought up another note too, that when Dumbo and the mouse, I think maybe it's right before they start seeing the visions, but I made a note that like they make being blackout drunk look very friendly and like a fun, festive thing. But again, like watching in retrospect, as you know, like a 40-year-old man now, and seeing this like drunk mouse stumble around, it's like, oh wow, that mouse is actually exhibiting behavior of like an extremely problematic alcoholic, which probably has like a family and friends that are affected by like the to the point where like it's cute that you're like bumbling around and like you can be a functional but way beyond the point of, you know, legal drunkenness. Like there's actually a problem going on with like you and your personality and your body probably, but the movie just completely normalizes it, and it's like, oh, what a bunch of fun drunks. But all I was just thinking is like that mouse probably beats his wife when he goes home.
Mrs. Timothy Mouse, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. No, yeah, I'm 43. I at least know how to pace myself well these days. So
It's easy to pace. I have a drink and a half and I fall asleep. So
there we go. And I guess we'll just say we could just say the crows and then just pass them by if you want.
yeah, well, honestly, I had a couple of notes about the crows. I mean, I don't think they're, again, we're two white guys talking
Yeah.
about this, but it didn't seem like they were as problematic as I was originally anticipating. Like, you know, I was kind of like, okay, let's brace yourself to hear something that's really gonna shock you in 2022's ears. But maybe that was more Song of the South, or it might just have been just their general depiction and not something specific that they do or say. But I felt like they were the only animals or people or anything that we even encounter in the entire movie that treat both Timothy and Dumbo as equals, and equals in that like they're gonna jibe them and sort of like, you know, work them up and like, you know, kid around with them the same as they do with each other. But the clowns, the first thing they want to do is exploit Dumbo. To even Timothy, the first thing that Timothy wants to do is exploit Dumbo. He's like, you know, I'm gonna work, me and you, we're gonna be stars, we're gonna be the top of the show. Like every single person that encounters Dumbo, the first inclination is, how can I exploit this animal for my own, you know, advancement? Until we come to the crows, which are literally the first characters in the entire movie that don't say, how can we use this elephant to our advantage? They just kind of like, oh, haha, that, you know, that's cool. How do you think you got up here? And they make fun of him for thinking that he flew. But in reality, they're like the most down to earth, helpful guides that they meet. And then I made a note here that I just think that just like the previous scene with Timothy getting drunk and normalizing that, they made smoking look so fucking cool. They're like blowing these huge rings, and like they blow it around Timothy Mouse and like this perfect little torus shape, and then it like expands out. And I just remember looking at that, I was like, man, that makes me want to go and like smoke a cigarette right now and blow a perfect O-ring. It would be so cool.
Yeah, actually, as soon as I said, do we go past the crows, I was about to back up and say exactly what you said. Wait, they are the only, they're actually morally the best creatures in this movie.
They are, yeah, they're absolutely, they are, what do they call it, like the neutral good, or the good neutral or something, where like they're not out to do any harm or exploitation to anyone, at least in the context that we see them in.
Yeah, So we'll at least back up that if you were to be like the crows, don't talk like the crows. That's really not going to work in 2022. But if you want to act like the crows, sure, that's great. Do that.
And also, this is the only ones that Timothy seems that he can shame them, because as they're laughing at Dumbo, he mentions, like, go on, laugh at him and kick him while he's down. This poor helpless little baby. You guys must feel real tough making fun of this baby. And they legitimately start feeling bad, like, oh yeah, I guess we're kind of being dicks here. I don't feel like he could have said that to anyone else in this movie, and for them to have been like, oh yeah, actually, yeah, sorry, we're being dicks.
Timothy's an amazing speech maker, isn't he? And
He is.
psychic driver. He's a mouse of many
He's
talents.
like the Dr. Jolly West of the Disney World.
Yeah. So now we get to the thing in the movie they call magic, which is Dumbo's magic feather, which he only need. So he's had his transformation now, but he still needs a bit of a crutch, I guess. Maybe because he's now dealing with things that are outside the definition of what he thought was reality.
Yeah, well, honestly, every single animal in this movie, aside from talking, but they're just constantly breaking the laws of nature. Like when they do the initial pachyderm pyramid where they're all supposed to stand on each other and everything, like that alone seems just as fascinating as an elephant that can like fly using his big ears. The fact that these elephants can like support each other and stand up. So if anything, the like him flying with his ears, even though I realize that's his entire shtick and that's the whole, assumed climax of the movie if you ignore the psychedelic trip, but it feels very underwhelming compared to all of the huge feats that we've already seen leading up to that.
I guess it's supposed to just feel like a moment of, blissful joy, freedom, flying joy after all of this, candy coated oppressiveness of the whole movie.
Yeah, and the like the lightness, the feeling of being weightless and being able to just fly through the air and carefree and everything.
But
and also I want to mention, as he's carefree and flying and being wholesome, he also gets a mouthful of peanuts and shoots them down at his own people, the other elephants, like a machine gun, like dogfighter. And it's sort of like a morbid, but also like I liked seeing it because I was like, yeah, screw those guys. Like you were being mean to Dumbo earlier, but he's totally shooting them with machine guns.
Yeah, they got thick skin anyway.
Yeah.
But I was thinking though, like, yeah, I guess there is a lot of unnatural and crazy stuff going on, but Dumbo is so young. It's like I have a lot of students. You ask them something simple, like, and they can do it. They can do it, but they're nerdy, which translates to like that's impossible. It's like such a strong statement, not like I don't want to do that or that'll be difficult. That's impossible, which I guess is how, because what Dumbo is still like 2 weeks old at this point, maybe. So
I mean, maybe figure out how to form a word first before you decide to jump off a building and fly, but that's just me.
Hey, I learned I had a bus driving license 5 years before I learned to ride a bike. So
okay, fair enough.
Sometimes you gotta fly before you can walk.
And I wanted to mention at the very, very end of this movie, because essentially the second that he starts flying and shooting the peanuts and stuff, like the movie's basically over. And then at the very end, they have the same train that we saw at the beginning that brought them out of Florida. I don't know if they're going back to Florida, if they're just continuing their traveling circus thing. But I didn't remember that Dumbo actually gets reunited with his mom in like the last 5 seconds of the movie, which felt like a tacked on afterthought. Like that, it provided no resolution at all from the earlier scene of her being like jabbed and locked up, and the my baby cradle scene. It did not resolve any of that for me at all. And I also had an even stronger departing note is when they're flying away and the other elephants that were being mean at the beginning of the movie, they're singing about like, oh, fly elephant fly. And I just made a note of like, shut up. You don't deserve to sing and celebrate Dumbo now. Like you guys were the ones that removed his elephant hood and cast him down into clownhood like forever with your secret pact. It was like, you're not allowed to celebrate him now. And it legitimately made me angry about that.
He didn't care. He owns a train now. How many elephants own trains? A
Yeah,
fantastic Art Deco train. we should.
Yeah, was this like a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory outcome where like the kid proves himself and takes over the business?
I guess pretty much. Well, again, if it's a movie as transformation, Dumbo has to become his what is
So I wonder
actualized
if
self.
Dumbo's running the circus and another elephant legitimately starts trampling people, does Dumbo command the circus workers to jab and poke the elephant and lock the elephant up? Or does
Well,
Dumbo just let the elephant trample?
Dumbo's the star of the circus. It's like on a movie set. It's the director that has to deal with that stuff. The star.
Okay, yeah, fair point. He doesn't have to get his hands dirty or his ears dirty.
Yeah, I don't think he's day to day in charge of the circus. Just
okay, yeah, fair point. I guess you wouldn't be, would you?
Do we want to throw out any final points of this movie? Anything you missed? We've got our ending credit.
I
now,
just mentioned that I mentioned I had a feels meter. It got up to 4. It got up to 4, and it ended after the. Sorry, what's the name of the song? My Baby Mine.
Baby Mine.
Baby Mine. It ended after that scene, and there was no more feels after that. I feel like that was kind of the end of like the really sad parts of the movie.
That's the initiation for the viewer, and then we get Dumbo's initiation.
Yeah, I guess that's all right. The trauma-based programming.
Right, will emotionally devastate you and then have some wild psychedelic fun.
Well, and honestly, this is such a core. This maybe you've got a better example, but this might be the beginning of that archetype of like that we don't see the mother killed, but we see the mother. Like if you said that the mom died after this scene, it wouldn't seem out of character. If anything, being reunited at the very end felt a little bit out of character, but this might be like that very seed of the like, you know what, I think we're just always going to kill the mom and then have the story revolve around this orphaned child trying to make it on their own in the wild.
Star Trek and Disney, all orphans. But yeah, that's interesting. And because most Disney characters have like no parents whatsoever. So the fact that he's even got a single parent, I guess Rapunzel gets reunited, but she didn't know her parents in the first place. So so her actual mom does get offed, but she was evil or whatever. Anyway, that's a movie for a different time. So I guess we'll cap this one today. Thomas, tell them what you're up to right now. This is the middle of July if you're interested. So
oh yeah, so man, it's easy to lose track. So I've just launched, and by the time you hear this, it'll probably be over, but still available. It's a new comic series called The Chosen One, and it stars another podcaster, Juan from the One on One podcast, which I believe you've done a few shows with.
Yeah, you did a couple Twilight Zones.
Yeah, and the premise of this comic series is essentially that it's a podcaster trying to break it into a bigger market and realizing that you literally have to join a secret society in order to get the exposure that all of these like big shots are getting. So it's kind of his adventure through the secret society of conspiracy podcasters specifically. But they travel to outer space and they go to inner Earth and they go to a place called Tartantia, which is based on Tartaria, blended with the concept of the taint.
Okay,
so it has
ask.
Yeah, no, it does. Because it taint above the earth and it taint below the earth. It's kind of the taint of the earth. So there's definitely a slightly mature edge to it, but it's going to be hilarious. I mean, it's one of the funniest things that I've been able to work on in a very long time. So it's really, really cool. And then I guess I'll drop this here that I'm also been working on a series of visual novels, which are kind of like interactive games that give you some branching dialogue. It's a very natural progression from a static page looking through comic books to, oh, now I can actually make decisions, a little bit of a cross between choose your own adventure and, legitimate video game dialogue. And the first one I'm working on is set in the 1940s, and it's called Lucifer Lives in Lower Manhattan. And it's based on a true story about Aldous Huxley's assistant in the 1940s was writing a movie called The Seventh Victim, which I believe it starred an actress named Jean Brooks, and she was actually supposed to be like this Satanist lady. It doesn't come across like very specifically in the movie itself, but part of the research this guy did for this movie was he was invited to an apartment in Greenwich Village, New York City, 1940s, with a group of high society, quote unquote, devil worshippers. So I did a whole bunch of research and found some like really cool elements of this. And I was like, man, this is so much cooler and deeper than just like an 8 to 10 page or a 20-page comic. I want to make this some like a longer experience that people can explore more. So this will probably be my very first Paranoid American game, coming maybe in like a year, who knows. But that's the biggest thing that I've kind of got going on, along with hell, like a list of 10 other comic projects and various stuff.
All right. No, I was asking. I think before I started recording, I told you I had been making binaural beats. So when I send them to the guy, I just send them with titles to piss him off, which is one of them is What Is and What Tain't. A Manson Family Christmas is one, and the two things Texas is known for. Which,
is it a Full Metal Jacket reference, I assume?
yes, it is.
Yeah.
I didn't want to actually type that in, so I was like, okay, I'm trying to piss him off. Actually, though, if you do want to check those binaural beats out, he puts those on YouTube, I think under the name The Mindful Traveler, which maybe is a little too generic to search for, but you can also find, I put the beats themselves at my music site, which is rovingsagemedia.bandcamp.com, and that's the damaged tape hypnagogic passages. So play that.
Right
If you're walking down the street when you're listening to it, please tell me if you fall over. That's actually my goal for it. I
just play with the inner ear balance.
Yeah, I mean, you need to do it with headphones, but I actually did. I followed my own warning, or disavowed my own warning, and played it in the car for a few minutes. I was like, yeah, that was a bad idea.
Start driving in circles.
Right. Well, my wife was curious. I was like, that's the place I usually play her music, right? And I'm driving for a few minutes. I'm like, yeah, I probably shouldn't be listening to this and driving. So, so yeah, don't drive and listen to it, but do tell me if you fall over. So, okay, it's off to the train with the pink elephants for me then. So, I will catch you in the future. Oh, cut there. Okay.
Right on, man.
Okay. Groovy. Wow. Yeah, we actually went on about Dumbo for quite some time. I was like curious, is this one going to be shorter? And it wasn't. So.
Oh yeah, no, we could have stretched this if you were like, hey, let's stretch this longer. I could have, because legitimately this might be my favorite Disney movie of all time, and I just didn't realize it until rewatching it again.
That's the revelation I had 5 years ago, or 10 years, whenever I watched it when my daughter was young. I was like, this is the best one.
Like the only closest ones would be ones that I probably saw in the 90s as Disney was trying to make their revival. But even, and I'm talking maybe like Aladdin, what is it, the Mermaid Princess or whatever the hell.
Oh, Little Mermaid. Yeah,
the Little Mermaid. Yeah. Like around that sort of era. I don't know if, I think Lilo and Stitch came out as I was like getting out of middle school or high school, and it was like, you know, Disney was baby stuff, so I was definitely not interested in it at that point. I think the closest next one would be Wall-E. It would probably go Dumbo and Wall-E, like neck and neck almost.
Yeah, I first saw Lilo and Stitch about 10 years ago, so I definitely didn't see it upon release, but yeah.
Have you seen, I assume you've seen Wall-E. I've seen almost every movie.
Almost every, no, it's funny I haven't seen, but yeah,
every Disney movie.
I did see what I've kind of fallen off the Pixar bandwagon recently. I guess I started watching Onward and wasn't into it, and I haven't seen the few since. I do need to see Turning Red, because the place I work is about a 10-minute drive from a zoo that has lesser pandas. So like, I gotta see the lesser panda.
I liked it. I thought it was good. It's not even in the same echelon as Dumbo for nostalgic reasons, again, because there's a kid that's watching you know, Turning Red, or sorry, what's the name of it?
That's it, Turning Red.
There's probably some kid that's going to be watching that from age 3 to 8, and they're going to think that's the best Disney movie ever created too. So
right, definitely. Anyway, if you want to keep up, you mentioned possibly switching up topics. The other one would be to, if you want to keep doing this, just at this point I would probably just make it its own podcast and post the first 4, and then, if you know, because it's
up to you, man. I honestly, I feel like the quality of movies starts to degrade sharply after Dumbo, so we might end up watching a lot of kind of like the Song of the South. there's not a lot to say about it other than to just criticize the time
Oh,
period and what it
yeah.
was written in and stuff.
I
But
was kind of thinking of not to do the pun, but to just hit on the big tent movies. So which means the next time would be skipping all the way to probably Bambi, which does have
okay,
the
yeah,
animalistic
right
stuff.
on.
So then
What
then you have
what
Peter
other
Pan,
topic did you have in
Cinderella.
mind?
Keeping the focus kind of where it's been. Like today, it wasn't like super hardcore magical, but it had enough to at least make that claim, I think. So this one doesn't come out for a month, so maybe stew on it if you wanted to get into something musical. The one problem with is I'm putting this in the Aural Hygiene one right now, which is the least listened to of the podcasts I do. I was kind of hoping this would actually get more people listening to it. So which was kind of my goal, because the sci-fi one and the Twilight Zone one, that's real niche, so it's like doing pretty well getting listeners. So
Yeah, man. Sometimes you have to just realize that the stuff you want to make might not be as popular as the stuff that people want you to make.
exactly.
Juan and I just had or just a month ago, we had a talk with a guy about flat Earth, and it's like a 2.5 hour conversation about flat Earth. And flat Earth is not either of our favorite topics, but it's just one that is so visceral. And sure enough, it's the first video that Juan ever had that got like 1,000 views in like a day or within 72 hours or something. And it's the same thing of like, why did it have to be this one out of all the topics and all the world? Why did you have to be the flat earth one that started skyrocketing? And it's just that's been my story forever and ever. It seems like I have a creative endeavor and this thing that I really want people to get fascinated in, and someone be like, oh, that's a cool blue balloon over there on that page. And then it's like, you should write a comic about the blue balloon, not literally, but it's like, really? That was just like a stupid thing. It's like, no, I care about that. I don't care about this other thing you've been working on for 10 years. I want the blue balloon. So sometimes you just learn to like, just, get really good at making blue balloons.
Yeah. So anyway, like I said, Dumbo doesn't even come out for a month, so stew on it. And also, I do, if you do want to talk about the Twilight Zone or a sci-fi movie or an animated sci-fi movie, those are the ones that people like actually have numbers where I feel nice about, or starting to feel nice about, I should say. So again, I haven't joined that secret society yet. So
Absolutely. I
podcasters.
feel so underqualified to speak on sci-fi just because I'm not an avid reader of fiction. I just read history and boring reference materials and computer programming books. I love sci-fi movies, but I just feel like I fish out of water trying to sound smart talking about it.
I really only started to read it about 2 years ago, and that was just because I had to stay in the hospital for a bit. And I was like, I'm going to read all the Star Trek novels and the Asimov books. So
That's
what
a
I
great
did.
place to start. Actually, man, there's a well, this isn't really like a book club type of thing, but this book called Arawan, which is just the word nowhere spelled backwards, by a guy named Samuel Butler. Have you ever heard of this?
I have not.
Highly, highly, highly recommended. Not just as a book itself, but within the book there's like a fictional book that the character discovers, and I think it's called like the Book of Machines, and it very closely correlates to like Asimov's like law of robotics, but it's its entire own thing, and it's absolutely fascinating. It seems so prophetic because I'm pretty sure this book was written in the late 1800s. I might be fudging that a little bit, but it was like far beyond its time, and he describes how machines and robots affect humankind in just the most prophetic ways. It's almost scary, and even to the point where there's one that hasn't come to pass, but it's been like one of the creepiest like sci-fi Black Mirror Twilight Zone-y things, where this society is like a utopian society where people have learned to just live in ultimate harmony and peace, and there's no sickness. But there's no sickness because if you become sick, that's illegal and you get thrown in jail for being sick. And once you're in jail, you've been removed from society. Therefore, nobody ever gets sick. At least it lives in utopia, because like, you get the sniffles, you start coughing, they throw your ass in jail and you never get to see utopia again. And this concept has always fascinated me of like, like just remove, like if Matthew was running to the train and he tripped and he broke his leg. Matthew's gone. Like we don't allow people that have deficiencies in our society at all. So you're just out immediately.
I was reading, it was like 15 years ago, I was reading like a Jared Diamond book or something, and talk about the idea like, oh, in the future, we'll probably go into a high rise and have to go to like several layers of like, bio checks or something, which has sounded that's starting to sound a little more likely at this point. I mean, I most stores in Japan, I'm probably in the States, want to have like the stick your face in the temperature checker first. The
well, I mean,
iPhone
and
thing.
if like for anyone that's been through military training, which might be a smaller subset than I think, but like if you go through MOP training, and I forgot what the actual acronym stands for, but it's essentially when there's like biochemical warfare and you might be in the thick of it, to exit the battlefield and to go back onto base, you go through these MOP stations where it's like the first one, they disinfect all your clothes, and then they start scrubbing you down, and then like there's these very specific stages that you go through so that when you come out at the end of it, you hopefully have like no pathogens or radiation or anything that can be spread. And that's kind of that same concept that maybe applied to like a high rise or like a nice shopping mall, that you can walk in onto the entry level, but then like each time you go to like the next level, there's a temperature check, there's a credit check, there's a social credit check, so that like once you actually get to the penthouse, you've already weeded out people that shouldn't be up there.
Actually, one sci-fi movie that kind of does that. It doesn't get in well. In time, it's not a great movie, but sort of has like the, like you have to go through checkpoints.
No,
to get
it's
to
a
the Elite
horrible
Center.
movie, but it's way better than it deserves to be. Isn't that it has like Justin Timberlake or
Yeah,
something
that's
as
right.
one of the. It's an amazing premise. It was shot in like it was shot like it was a boy band music video. But if you can get over that aspect of it, it's a really good movie in my opinion. It's
We
entertaining as hell.
we did a podcast on that one. I think we spent half the time talking about the cars, which because it has cool car. It does have cool
It's
cars
cool,
in
man.
it.
Again, it's way cooler than it deserved to be.
Okay, I'll catch you later then. I do have to start going on my way to work.